and I'm honored to welcome you all to the Virginia Humanities Center and the Lemon Lounge here today, and also a warm welcome to those joining us on the live stream today for this event. Now, before we dive into this exciting talk, I do have a few housekeeping items I would like to go over, especially for those who are new to our space. First of all, we do have food available, so help yourself through the kitchen there, sandwiches and drinks. The restrooms are located through there, down the hall. There are some signs to follow those. And after the talk, feel free to stick around for treats, coffee, conversation. And while you're here, don't forget to browse the Vaughn Library shelves in the Lemon Lounge. We have books and media that have been created by Virginia Humanities Fellows and grantees over the years, so feel free to take a look at those. And also, the shelves back here are adorned with names of donors to Virginia Humanities whose help has helped create the space and make today's presentation available in the lounge. And now it's my privilege to introduce our speaker, Alicia Aroche. Now, Alicia has been recognized nationally and internationally for her role as a film director and producer. Alicia is a communications professional and a story keeper. Now, Alicia is part of an esteemed and growing group of Virginia Humanities Fellows, having joined as part of the second cohort of the Public Humanities Fellowship Program, which was launched in 2022. Her project, that you're going to learn about today, aims to reclaim and preserve the untold stories of pioneering Richmond-originated artists who have been instrumental in the development of jazz, soul, and funk. Now, this endeavor not only highlights the artist's contributions, but also weaves in the rich tapestry of family history and the interconnectedness of the artistic community. And I'm looking forward to this, and happy that all of you are here today to join us. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Alicia.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Appreciate you coming out or walking from down the hall. Thank you for everyone joining online. It's really a pleasure to be able to come and talk a little bit about this work in progress, because it is still a work in progress. I am really honored to have been selected as one of the Public Humanities Fellows. It really provided a space to really dive into these stories. It's a story I've been wanting to tell for a really long time, so I'm happy to share where we are with it today. So 32 blocks, how Churchill helped make the culture, and that's a tagline that just came about after reflecting on many of the interviews and just some of the history about Churchill. All right. So, for anyone that may not be from Virginia or not familiar with Richmond, I thought it would be helpful to offer just some historical context about Richmond. So Richmond was founded in 1733, and as many people may know or understand, that it was the hub for human trafficking here in the South, rivaling New Orleans. There were 11,000 kidnapped Africans who were trafficked in Richmond as part of the transatlantic slave. Also in 1775, quaint Church Hill was also known as St. John's Church, historic district. And you all may be very familiar with the speech, "Give me liberty, give me death." So that's a little bit of information to orient you to Richmond or Church Hill. Church Hill is the oldest neighborhood in Richmond, and it still has the most antebellum structures in its community. It is the first 32 blocks of the city of Richmond, so that's where the inspiration for the title came from. Church Hill is the first 32 blocks of Richmond. In the 1950s, many Black Americans moved from rural counties in Virginia and other places around the South. As that was happening, the white residents that were there started to move out, and construction highways were built through that community. Interstate 64 came through and really disoriented and disrupted the neighborhood. And around the 1950s or so, the community, the demographics changed from 75% white to 95% black between 1950 and 1960. That's when my grandparents moved into Churchill. They moved from Charles City in 1962 and built a home on 29th Street, which is still there, and we still have family living there. So, I think one more bit of things. So, one of the really significant statistics that I've heard, I haven't really known exactly where it comes from, but the Virginia Tourism Office also quotes this statistic too. 1 in 4 Black Americans can trace they have roots in Richmond because of the transatlantic slave trade. So Richmond and Churchill is central to many of our experiences here in the US. So another reason why this story is so important. So I just wanted to take some time to orient anyone who's not familiar with Richmond or some of those historical facts. All right. Now, so what I'm going to do, this is where it gets, I know that's a lot of stark information to take in, but this is where it gets to be more of the hopeful, joyful part about Churchill. And the story really called me because, as I said, my family is from Churchill. I grew up in Churchill. I grew up hearing about most of these artists. My father, who is not from Richmond, he's from Ohio, met my mother in Churchill. The story that we always hear is that he was on leave from the Air Force, came on 29th Street, saw my mother, and that was it. And so that's where he met my mom, and they got married not long after, and then he went on to Vietnam. My mother was pregnant with my older brother at the time. So when he came back, of course I was born in '69. So when he came back, I learned through many years later, not understanding what he had been through. When I was young, I remember him being very isolated and withdrawn. My mother said he would walk around the house sometimes like a sentry. He was a military police in Vietnam. And so he'd walk around the home and not really talk to us. He'd go in the attic and just kind of disappear. And we would go into the attic. The studs would still be exposed, and you see the insulation, and he'd have his turntable. And that's where we would go and just hang out with our dad. And that's where I became fascinated with all of these artists, reading the liner notes and just remembering all of these artists. So it's really special to be able to have met them and hear their stories. So I'm going to just talk a little bit one by one about the artists that I did get to interview. And that was amazing too, because when I proposed this story, I had no idea how I was going to get in touch with Lonnie Liston Smith or Wawa Watson's brother. But I'll share a little bit about how that happened. Richmond's small, and once you know a few people, you can kind of make those connections. So along the way, I'm going to ask people if you're familiar with any of these artists. Show of hands, how many of you are familiar with Lonnie Liston Smith? I am surprised that there are not more hands. And you will be surprised too after you hear a little bit more. But these are some of the artists that Lonnie Liston Smith played with. Are any of you familiar with these artists? Max Roach, Art Blakey, Abby Lincoln, Betty Carter. How many of you heard of Miles Davis? How many of you heard of Jay-Z? Okay. Lonnie is probably one of the most sampled artists out there. I think there are at least 500 or 600 samples of his work. I'm going to share with you later in the slide presentation the song that Jay-Z sampled, along with another one of our narrators whose work was sampled, and they actually were Jay-Z's biggest hits. That's why Jay-Z is, I'm going to say it, Jay-Z, so huge. So Lonnie has worked with so many artists. He's such a warm, kind, humble person. So I probably understand why more people don't know about him, because there's just a quiet energy about him. But let me just play. One of the things that I had really a lot of fun with was all of the archival research that I'm pulling together to tie the narrative together. And so I found this piece. I'll get out of the way with him. You can't. Do you hear the organ? That's Lonnie on the organ. So it wasn't that loud, but Lonnie was on the organ. There's another Richmonder, he didn't stay in Richmond, but there was another Richmonder that was on the drums. How many of you have heard of Al Foster? A few of you. So he was born in Richmond, but he moved up to Harlem. He was on the drums. And there was another gentleman named James Ntume on percussion, who went on and played with Lonnie in his group, Cosmic Echoes, and then he went on and had his own career with a group called Ntume. Have you ever heard the song Juicy Fruit? Yeah. That's Ntume. So there's so many connections there. So Lonnie talked so much about how he loved playing with Miles Davis and didn't really want to leave playing with him, but he talked about once he left and started his own career. So that was phenomenal to get to meet him and speak with him. Okay. All right, the next person that we talk about here is Wawa Watson. His born name was Melvin Reagan. They, again, lived only blocks away from one another. The picture at the bottom is his brother. Wawa Watson died in 2018, I believe. So not around to share his stories, but his brother was more than happy to do that. And Wawa Watson was one of those names I know I saw everywhere when I read liner notes. You know, he was one of the Motown Funk brothers. So if you think of the guitar opening Papa Was a Rolling Stone or Let's Get It On, that is Wawa Watson. His brother told some really, sweet stories. He learned how to play guitar by a blind neighbor. And the guitar that he had only had 3 strings. So it's amazing what he was so determined to learn how to play that guitar. He's played with the Temptations, Michael Jackson. No one would say this on camera, but it was said twice. They said that Wawa made Herbie Hancock funky. No one would ever say that in public, but I'm saying it, and I'm probably being recorded right now. So that was pretty amazing to be able to speak with him, speak with his brother. One of the early groups that he started out with in Richmond was called the Montclairs, and I have that highlighted for a reason. Any of these highlighted names, I'm going to talk about how all of these artists were connected, not only just by how close they lived in Churchill, but how they started their careers. So he's another one that I was really honored to be able to dive into his story. Here's a, let me turn this up. Oh, I mean.
If you look on here, no, on the keyboard, there's a volume just to the right.
Oh.
Icon.
So the next artist I wanted to mention him, I didn't get a chance to interview him, and I tried really hard. He was best friends with Wawa Watson. He's still really good friends with his brother Larry, and that's Jerome Braley, and I have an arrow pointing to him. Jerome Braley was the drummer in the early 70s for Parliament Funkadelic. He is a Hall of Fame, he was inducted in the Hall of Fame with Parliament Funkadelic. He wrote Give Up the Funk, which was the original title of my project. And so he co-wrote that. He also played with the Chambers Brothers, the Five Stairsteps. As a huge Prince fan, I was really excited to learn that he played on one of Prince's really, really early albums as well. So just to give you a little taste if you're not familiar with, why is that not working? Not clicking for me. Let's see. All right, for some reason not clicking for me. Okay, well I'm gonna have to let it go, but look him up. Jerome Braley, Parliament Funkadelic. All of these artists live here in Richmond, and they are still really close friends. So as I said, I was at Larry's home, and I said, I'm trying to get in touch with Jerome, and he said, you want to talk to Jerome? And he just picked up the phone. But he just decided he wasn't available to do it, so. All right. Clement Burnett Sr. Now he is here, I have an arrow pointing here. He lived in, when Jamal interviewed me, we talked about how Churchill at that time was a multi-class community. So you could have a neighbor who might be a lawyer, and then down the corner you might live in the public housing, and then your kids would be playing together, and you can go and have access to things. So Clement was one of those people that lived in, it is called Mosby Court. So he didn't have a lot, but he had his guitar and had connections to Wawa, and you'll learn later Lonnie Liston Smith's brother Ray, who we'll talk about. So he's a guitarist and he's a singer. And at a very young age, he played with the Harmonizing Four, which is a legendary gospel group from Richmond. The father of Lonnie Liston Smith and Ray Smith, who I'll mention in a moment, was a singer in the Harmonizing Four. And then there's another group that connects with one of the other artists too. So a couple other quick things I'll share. So the woman on the right, Debbie Henry, she now has been singing with Patti LaBelle for 20 years. And so she's not from Richmond, but she went to Virginia Union and is very tight-knit with this group. And the gentleman at the top on the right, Carlton Robinson, he played with the Sweet Inspirations with Elvis. So he would go play with them and then come back and all of that. So all of this, again, is in, all of these artists in Richmond. And we talked a lot about wondering why these artists aren't as known. And I'm just really curious that if we were not in the South, if we were not in, Detroit or, New York, if more of these artists would be known. I don't know, I just wonder about that. So that's something that has me really curious. So he's another one that we spoke to. Say something about this.
This is Clement Burnett, Sr. Member of the 70s group Silk, singer and guitarist.
Now, did you notice that really ever slight speed up of that song? So, that song was called Can't Stop Turning You On by a group called Silk. Now that group that Clement was in changed his name several times because of contract, differences. But that group Silk had that song sampled recently by a Scottish group called LF Systems. And it was, in 2022, it was considered the biggest hit in the UK in decades. At the time, Beyonce's Renaissance was released, and that couldn't beat that song. So Clement didn't know that song was out there in such a big way. So that was one of the conversations we had about artist equity and just how the music industry worked then and still works. But he had no idea. But all they really did was speed up the song, and I think they got another vocalist to sing it, and that way they could clear it. So I just wanted to share that song is huge. I'm hoping this is going to work. I don't know what's happening with my links. It's not working. Well, I will have to verbally say what this is. So Clement was in a group called Ujima, and they recorded, how many of you are familiar with the hit by Daryl Hall and John Oates called She's Gone? All right, a lot more hands. Ujima, Clement recorded that first. It was written for that group, actually. And then, of course, Daryl Hall and John Oates recorded it years later and it became a big hit. But that is, I don't know why my links are not working, but it's his voice. So if you go on YouTube and type in Ujima, Ujima, She's Gone, you're going to hear Clement singing that song. Little country boy from Mosby Court is what he'll call himself. That was him. All right. All right, and I bet this link will not work, but I was not as familiar with this song because I think it was a lot, way, before my time. A Little Bit of Soap. Anybody here familiar with that song? A Little Bit of Soap. And it's been remade by other artists too. So Ray Smith, there's an arrow pointing to him. He's Lonnie Liston Smith's younger brother. They have another brother, Donald, who passed away last year. But Ray is the singer and one of the singers in the family. The Jarmels were from Richmond. They all went to Armstrong High School as well. So this was a time when artists, there was segregation in the music industry, and so it was difficult for artists to get radio play or even get, a deal. So they were the first artists to be signed to a label called Laurie Records. You may have heard some artists, I think it's Del Shannon. The names are escaping me, but there are a lot of other artists in that genre. That song went all the way to the number 12 on the Billboard charts. So that's pretty amazing. He talked about his tour. They toured the South. They did Apollo, the Apollo Theater. He also talked about how they navigated through the South and, how they were treated in some spots, and some spots how they were cared for in others. One of the things that they both talked about, Lonnie and Ray, is their father's influence. They had so many artists coming into their home. One of them that he talked about was Sister Rosetta Tharpe, who I'm sure almost all of you know. Sam Cooke. They would come to their homes when they were traveling around the South to get a meal because they couldn't always stay in the hotels. And so Lonnie and Ray's mom would make meals for the groups as they were coming in. Wawa Watson's mother and father did the same thing too. If they couldn't get a meal, they would sometimes call their parents and have them eat there. So that's Ray. So Ray is, he has, once the Jarmels kind of went away, he didn't really perform much until more recently. They've done some revivals of the Jarmels with another one of the folks in this group here. I'm mad that my links aren't working. All right, so Tyrone Little Tommy Thomas. He is multi-talented. He's a writer, producer, singer. He was friends with, how many of you heard of Major Harris? Okay, Delphonics. Yes, so Major Harris was also from Richmond. He grew up in Jackson Ward. So they grew up together and they were in their first group together. Tyrone was in Brother Love with Clement. Tyrone played drums for Patti LaBelle before it became LaBelle. Then he started a group called The Whole Darn Family, which you'll see a clip, he'll talk about that in a moment. And he also played in a more recent version of the Jarmels. So you're just seeing how they're all connected. And again, this is 60 years that these gentlemen grew up together and they're still connected, still playing. And so I just think it's beautiful.
I wanted to put together a special group, and I wanted to call them the Whole Darn Family.
Who recognizes that?
We had very few mixed groups when we started. It was just like you had a black man or you had a white man. Or you might have one white person in the band or one black person. Even though it looked great, but it turned out to be a lot of heartbreak. You think you're going one way and you're really going the other. It's not the way you want to go.
I saw some heads bobbing. You all recognize that bass line and that sample. So that is what made Jay-Z blow up, that sample. That was his first big hit. In the film, he talks about the moment he learned that Jay-Z had sampled. He didn't know. It was all over the radio, and a friend called him and told him that the song was sampled, and there is a story about how he, tried to get his royalties. Just another example of just how the music industry is not kind to artists. and a lot of these artists talked about how they started out really young. They had no one to advise them, so that was one of the problems. But my understanding is that this is a pretty universal experience for many artists. If you're not in the upper tier, then these things are happening to you. All right, Cliff Fuller. Now, Cliff was the person that connected me to all of these artists. He's the nephew of Wawa Watson. So I found him just by going on YouTube and looking at that Wawa Watson clip and him mentioning that that was his uncle, and then I emailed him and we got together, and he connected me to all of these artists. So he's a younger artist, but he's been mentored by Ray Smith and Clement. He plays with Clement. He's also been a producer himself. He worked with Gerald Levert, and if you're not familiar with Gerald, he's a son of one of the OJs. How many of you know the OJs? So he was one of the sons of the OJs. Cliff did some production work with Kobe when Kobe was trying to do his hip hop thing. And then there was a group called the Jazz Poet Society that was really immersed in the neo soul sound that was really prominent. D'Angelo, The Roots, Erykah Badu. He was opening for those artists. And he actually got to meet, even though D'Angelo is from the Richmond area, he got to meet D'Angelo while he was on tour, and he said it blew his mind. So this is Cliff. So he's the one that really helped me connect with all of these artists. And because my links aren't working, I can't show you the video. All right. Now this is a younger hip hop artist. So I say younger relative to the other artists. His name is Davian Green, but he goes by Firebird Phoenix. He's also from the east end of Richmond. He's been in so many different hip hop groups around Richmond. I can't really remember or name them, but he is, shares his story of coming up through hip hop and being influenced by all of these artists. And he also talks about ageism. You know, he's over 50 and he's doing his hip hop thing, but he's not allowing that mindset to stop him. You know, he wants to keep going because music is music. It doesn't have an age or shelf life. The good music doesn't have a shelf life. Most of the stuff now, I don't know. So that's Davian. Okay. I'm just gonna, we're just not showing. I'm gonna play that again with a little context because I didn't know it was gonna pop up. So one of the things that was really, really special for me, and I said this in my interview with Jamal, is, you know, in being in Lonnie Liston Smith's home with his grand piano. And the piece that he's playing is called A Garden of Peace. Now, if you're a hip hop head, you know that through Jay-Z. But Lonnie wrote that years ago, that's his music. And to stand there and to listen to him play that, it just brought the whole experience really full circle. It's a really short clip, but, I'm not sure why the video's not showing. But I'll play it again just for sound. Play it again. How many of you hip hop heads recognize that now? So that's Lonnie Liston Smith, and that's Jay-Z, one of Jay-Z's songs, and it is flying out of my head right now. Jamal, you probably remember which one it is. I don't remember. It was with Foxy Brown, if anyone wants to look it up. Oh, no, that's not it. No, that's the Tyrone Thomas. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're right. No, I don't want to say it. That might be why I'm forgetting it, because I don't want to say the name of it. It's not words that I want to say. So just some few things that I hope to accomplish with this project, preserving cultural continuity, a statement in the face of erasure and gentrification. You know, there's no marker to say that these artists ever lived in Churchill. Now, the high school that most of them went to, Armstrong, was torn down and they built new mixed income housing, and they do have a memorial park there, but their names are not on it. It's mostly, I would say mostly business scientists. There are a couple of musicians. So I want to look into what needs to happen for that to happen. But so there's no memory of them there. Also to amplify Richmond and Churchill's place among music hubs. They all talked about, even though they don't get the credit for this, when they would go and play with artists like Miles Davis, or there was another artist escaping me, that when they found out they were from Richmond, they got really different treatment, but treatment in a good way, because they knew that you had to be really good if you were from Richmond and you were playing at this level. So there was a level of respect for them that they all received when people would find out they were from Richmond. So I'm hoping this will amplify that, we're not Detroit, we're not Philadelphia, but our story and our history is just as important. And I also wonder too if being from the South, I can say this, there's often stigma about being a Southerner, right? You have an accent, people think, your pace of life is slower. It's something to not be desired. So I'm hoping that would help change the narrative a little bit as well. Encourage artist equity. They all talk about how Lonnie's quote was, the economics weren't often right. So just talking about that, mentorship. They all expressed worry that younger artists, especially students, don't have access to instruments and things in the school and music education. And, afraid that technology is going to wipe all that out. I don't think so. I have an 11-year-old drummer who loves all of these artists and probably didn't know who Jay-Z was until I started this project. So I think there's hope. And again, just continuing to imagine a hopeful future through music, which is what I had, and which our ancestors, my ancestors, that's what we had. That's what got us through. Growing up through civil rights and integration, that was really hard for my father being a Vietnam vet. It was a really hard time. But I remember music always playing. That on weekends, music on all day long. So I know that's what saved me in many ways, but it also connect with my father. And my father called me when I was back there doing pickups with Jamal, and my dad will be 80 next month. So, so the music is just a really strong part of my foundation, and I just hope other people will be able to experience that. A couple of things here. Let's see what I got here. All right, so this is an iconic photo we took in front of the Robinson Theater in Richmond. Ray Smith, Clement Burnett. So I'll start from left to right and just call them out so I won't get in anyone's way. Ray Smith, Clement Burnett, Tyrone Thompson, Larry Reagan, who's holding a picture of Wawa, Cliff Fuller, and Lonnie Liston Smith. So has anyone ever been to Richmond and been to the Robinson Theater? Yeah, it's on 29th and Q. There was a saying that if you go to 29th and Q, you can meet everybody in Church Hill, because that was where everything was happening. And so I arranged a photo shoot back in April, and some of them hadn't seen each other for years. Some of them hadn't been back here in 40, 50 years. This is where they could go to the movies as kids. It was, again, during segregation, but they remember being able to go here. And there was a moment that someone was shooing us away, and I was really angry. I think I was sharing this in my Q&A. Really angry that the person just had no clue who he was shooing away. So that just shows how these stories have been lost. And so it's a really special picture and special moment there. So, and I also found it interesting that Ray and Lonnie are on the end, because it was their father that influenced all of these guys. And they are the ones, they're considered like the stars of this group. They're, their family, and Lonnie's like the star of the group. So, let's see. All right, so just kind of wrap up what I'm doing, how the Humanities, Virginia Humanities has helped me. So I've been able to immerse myself in this project. It took 4 months and just did nothing doing that, and that was really helpful. And just exploring the narrative that I hope to tell. The initial funding for the project, I would not have had the money. I, got some really good cinematographers and photographers, so wanting to make sure it's really high quality. And blazed a trail for additional support. So when I put that Virginia Humanities stamp on my presentation, or I told people that was who was supporting me, it just opened the door. Currently, this project is now being physically sponsored by the Southern Documentary Fund. Thank you, Adam, for that tip. So what that means is they will also support when I want to do rough cut screenings. They're physically sponsoring me, so donations. I have this next group called the Kindle Project that someone locally nominated me for, and I needed a fiscal sponsor, so I was able to receive those funds. Marmoset is a music licensing group, and when they heard what I was doing, there was a particular Tommy Thompson song that I wanted. They literally cut their fees way down for me to be able to use them in the film. It's actually his first recording. I won't say what it is yet because I'm trying to entice you to keep updated. And then a well-known recording studio let us shoot there for free, as well as another group as well. So yeah, we're in post-production, but also have some more filming to do, ongoing fundraising, and hopefully an impact campaign, which when it's done, the idea is to submit this to festivals, nationally, internationally. Know there's going to be a huge interest internationally. A lot of these folks are more well-known internationally, which is another thing that makes me kind of sad. All right, so I'm about to do something that is totally out of my comfort zone. Two things. One is to say that if you want to keep up with us, you know, I'm not big on promotion, but if you're interested in following us, we're on TikTok and we're on Instagram as well. That's where I've gotten the most traction as well. So if you want to follow us, you can do that too. Yep. All right. And that's it. So I will. I'll pause for questions. There we go. Oh, yes.
Connection of Miles Davis again to Richmond, I wasn't clear about that.
Yeah, so Miles Davis is Lonnie Liston Smith played with Miles Davis for many, many years. So Miles Davis is connected to Richmond in that way.
But he didn't play in Richmond.
Well,
With him.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know in terms of, I'm sorry, in terms of touring and things like that, but I don't know.
He never played in Churchill with these other people.
We didn't mention that.
Had one other thing I wanted to ask you about Richmond. I'm kind of a student of Virginia history, and I thought that Richmond was founded in the capital moved there in 1733 from Williamsburg because the center of Virginia population had moved westward by that point.
Yeah, so I think as a Black American, I'm looking at it from a point of view of how it fueled a part of our history that is not one that to be happy about. Yeah, yeah.
That's why it was moved there.
It was, now I was making the point about us as Black Americans, music and these things being such a source of joy, and I really wanted to show what we've come from. We've come from such pain, but we were able to create these communities of joy through music. But the James River was a source of being able to traffic people. So that's the point I was making. Yes.
Little Richard, I'd always heard he was from Richmond, but this is Church Hill. So were there people in Richmond that were separate in their music?
Little Richard.
What about Bojangles?
No, yeah, Bojangles Robinson is from Richmond, and that's what the Robinson Theater is named after him. Yes.
Okay.
But I'm not, I have not.
Richard? No? I always heard that. And then he went to Atlanta.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
I was curious about a couple of things. During the research, did anything about environmental racism come up in terms of, you talked about the construction of 64 through these communities and the intentional, I was wondering about environmental racism as in like the intentional construction of polluting stuff like highways through Black communities. And then in making a documentary that's based on musicians, are there any challenges fitting in the music with the narrative and the interviews?
So still in progress, and I'm really looking forward to figuring out how to weave that narrative. But the second question, I'm not sure, I'll go back to that and maybe ask you because I'm not sure I understand it. But environmentally, I know about environmental racism. I don't think we take a deep dive in that, but I do know we do, we want to mention how the highways were cut through and literally disrupted communities. I know even in my own family, my mother said once 64 was built, there were family members that lived maybe on the other side, and you didn't really, you were disoriented. You didn't really know, well, how am I going to get there? There were several black cemeteries who, that once the highway was cut through, there are people who literally thought that their family members were under the highway so they could no longer get there. I mean, some of this was true or not true, I don't know. But right now it's more of the stories that people are remembering about what it was like to have the highways cut through and the different disruption. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, yeah.
Is Lonnie still playing with some of the artists?
He doesn't play as much, and he doesn't play.
Mostly kind of in his
COVID really shut that down. The last time he really went out was, he just actually put out his first album in 25 years on a label called Jazz is Dead. And they actually flew him out to LA, and he recorded with them. The producer, one of the producers, was a member of A Tribe Called Quest, Ali Shaheed Muhammad, and another gentleman named Adrian Younge. And they had him come out and play the music, and they did their thing. And then he did a concert while he was out there as well. But he doesn't really perform. Like, he's really like to himself. But he is in such great physical shape. He and his brother. He just turned 83 in December. Yes.
I just wanted to say I think it's great that you're using TikTok and Instagram and sort of getting this music out there, and I would love to see more of these videos.
Oh, thank you.
But have you had a response from young people who are interested in learning more about where the samples come from?
Yeah, there a lot, and maybe not, and some not so young people too, like because saying, I didn't know that was Lonnie's sample, or I didn't know that was that song. So that's been really fun. There was someone, speaking of Miles Davis, someone asked that clip that I shared, they wanted to know what albums Lonnie played with him on, and I was able to tell them the names of the albums. But he said, I listened to both of them, but I never really realized that they played together. And so that's a lot, especially in Lonnie's case. He played with so many different artists, and a lot of them, not just Lonnie, a lot of them played with each other. And so we just don't know about that, so yeah. Any other? Yes.
Are there still other artists living in Churchill that I mean, I know
Yeah.
musicians that you're aware of? Is there still some kind of an exodus of community there?
No. Right now, the big thing that's happening is one of the housing developments public housing developments that was built like in the 50s or 60s, it's being torn down and it's being rebuilt, and I think ideally for a mixed income. The high school they all went to was torn down to build housing. Virginia Commonwealth University is about to take over like several buildings. So, and there's some like hip little restaurants and things like that that Richmond's being known for, but none of this history or sense of place is there because, all of these artists moved out into the different counties. And as I mentioned, it's being gentrified now. So it's not considered it's not considered home anymore. I mean, my family still lives there, but when I go there, I'm like, doesn't feel like it did when I grew up.
I know of two women who are on the national stage who are from Churchill.
Mm-hmm.
Their parents still live there, sisters. Maybe there's more.
There may be. There probably are. I went through connections. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd love to know who they are. Yeah. These were the connections that I was able to make through just originally, and you know, and there are probably multiple versions of this project. You know, I'm going back based on where I can go with the funding I'm able to get, and you know, might be a part 2. Any other questions or?
I think that might be it.
Okay.
All right, well,
Thank you.